Why have we seen consistently each 6 months that debt to GDP number just keeps getting slightly higher, slightly further out? Why aren't we seeing consolidation faster?
Yeah.
And you say that they're trying to reverse what happened under the Zuma years. I understand that. Is state capture something we still need to worry about?
Yeah. So let's go. So one of the problems is, and the minister says this directly, is that he couldn't stick to the MTF targets from last year on deficits and debt because, because what came to him was spending demands, the public sector wage bill and the SRD grant. Those are the two big hits that came in, and there were others. There's the public sector early retirement program and a few others that gave him 58 billion for year one. Right, so remember, over the MTF period, we're looking at 58 billion, then 48 billion and beyond. So there's, and just a footnote for readers who are following all these numbers, the SRD grant is only in the budget for this year. It's not in for years 2 and 3 in the MTF. So there's another 40 billion sitting there. So the key reason for the National Treasury, and I keep on distinguishing between the National Treasury and, let's say, government as a whole, because National Treasury knows exactly. I mean, I could be speaking as a National Treasury official. They are sold on the idea that debt to GDP needs to come down, but what's pushed back at them are these extra spending demands. And I think that's the key reason that we sit in the situation where we off the deficit and debt targets. So the idea that you've got now 58 billion in this year that the minister now suddenly needs to find room for is his first problem. Normally that gets resolved like it did a year or two back by either a commodity super cycle, so you see massive revenues spiking coming into government, and happy days, they can pay off the debt or the deficit that they didn't foresee in terms of these spending claims, or growth improves. Now we didn't have either. We didn't have any support in what I call the denominator. So we always look at debt to GDP.
We didn't get lucky this time around.
Exactly. So you look at debt to GDP, and two things need to happen. Either GDP can go up, in which case your debt repayments can go down, right? Or you have to work really hard to bring down debt, right? Which then leads to and so we didn't have any support in the denominator. And the numerator was spending demands that increased dramatically, or the 58 billion, the extraordinary numbers. But then to your point, I think there still is a large apportionment of the blame that needs to go to the continued, let's call it unaudited spending, right? Whether it's inefficiencies in government or just straight out corruption, right? That you are seeing in certain elements of whether it's local government, provincial or national government. And there is every will that comes through the president and his colleagues to stamp this out. But I think, there are elements where it's very, very clear that if you don't improve the spending allocation and the efficiency of the spending, it's going to be much harder to bring down those debt to GDP levels.
I had no idea that the COVID grant was only in for 1 year. I thought it was for 3 years.
No. So you have the public sector wage bill that's in for the 3 years, but the COVID grant is only in for 1 year.
Sure, and that's unlikely that's going to be dropped.
Exactly.
So we're probably going to find even tighter spending requirements next year.
Unless, the numerator and the denominator. So unless we find ways in which to
get lucky,
right? So GDP goes up, we get a commodity super cycle, or we do really well on the supply side reforms that are coming through from government. So I think that's quite an important element. So you are seeing investments in public infrastructure that are possibly coming through. Treasury announced public-private partnerships for further infrastructure investment. So unless and I think there's a slow turnaround happening, say with Transnet and other state-owned enterprises. So unless you see that coming through, and it supports growth, you do then have to turn to public expenditure, and you need to ask the question: okay, are we spending in the right places? Do we need all these statutory bodies? All the hard questions about efficiency of government spending. Now, partly that's alluded to in the early retirement plan that Treasury has announced. So in the extraordinary new spending of 58 billion, there's actually a negative amount that gets you to 50, and one negative is the early retirement packages for public sector employees. I think it's that kind of thinking that needs to guide us if we are going to continue in the sort of spending demands, right, through the COVID grant and beyond.